Staying with Donald Trump, an important new development in his titanic battle with the BBC, who is threatening to sue for $5 billion. Now, you'll have heard on this show last week some scepticism from American lawyers about whether Trump would succeed. But he's pushing on, and earlier today the BBC chairman Samir Shah made it clear the corporation would not simply hand over licence payers' money and fold. He told the staff there is no basis for a defamation case, and we are determined to fight this. Good news, I think. Let's talk now to Roger Mosey, the former head of BBC TV News. Roger, great to have you on the show. Do you welcome the chairman's determination to fight rather than fold?
I do, yes. I think it's good that Samir Shah, as chairman, is being firm. But I think it's important to say he has to be firm based on the legal case. There might be a bit of a temptation to play politics now, which is what Donald Trump is doing. But the BBC has to stick to the legal fundamentals, which are that this programme was not broadcast in the US, and it doesn't appear to have had any impact in the state of Florida, which Trump won by a mile, and which is where he is launching the legal action. So the BBC has to stick to those legal fundamentals before it risks having a punching match with Donald Trump.
Of course, there is real jeopardy here, as we both know, because if they were wrong about that and actually the case progressed and they lost the case, or they had to spend a huge amount of money on the legal costs, it's very unclear how that money would be pulled together.
Yes, it's very dangerous for the BBC if it became a case that was winnable for Trump in the US. But imagine the counterfactual here, because Donald Trump doesn't appear to have known about this terrible case. And it was a big mistake by the BBC, but he didn't appear to know about it 10 days ago. And if you imagine that the BBC had broadcast a programme to the United States, it had had a big effect on the election and he might have lost it. In that case, you can see then there's an argument for $5 billion. You can't see an argument for $5 billion if it doesn't appear to have had any effect at all.
And this seems to be a decision, well, I'm sure the decision was taken by the board, but certainly largely by Samir Shah, the chairman. BBC doesn't have any kind of other leadership at the moment. So when we hear MPs say, no, we've lost two people from the top of the BBC, but really the chairman must go as well. How dangerous would that be for the BBC in terms of its actual, who's running the place, who's speaking for the place?
It would be dangerous. And I think that's why this particular juncture for the BBC is so dangerous. No Director General, no obvious successor. No Director of News, no obvious successor. And Samir Shah, I think, is a very good man. However, the board that he chairs has been dysfunctional. So it's obvious in the last few days that the BBC board has not functioned properly. And therefore you have everything in the BBC at the moment not working. And that's why it's so dangerous for them.
Now, I am a shrewd reporting person, and therefore I strongly suspect that Roger Mosey is not going to put himself forward for Director General of the BBC for the time being, at least. Do you have any other candidates in mind? And can you talk a little bit about how difficult finding the right person will now be?
I think some of the ideas, you're quite right, Andrew, that it's not one for me, but when you look at the field, there are some very good people. Jay Hunt, obviously, who I work with, Kevin Backhurst now at RTE in Ireland. But I mean, some people are saying that what the BBC should do is put in the best chief executive it can, someone really to run the organisation and get the organisation right, and then have a deputy director general or a head of news who are in charge of the journalism. So there may be a number of ways of skinning this particular cat. But you've got to have the BBC restored to the best possible position. I thought your New Statesman article last week was excellent because the BBC is worth fighting for, yes. It's also got to be better. It's about issues of competence and leadership as well as bias. The bias thing, in a way, is fixable. That the competence and leadership in a difficult age is really tricky. And that's where the BBC has to move quickly to get it right.
Bless you for that. And to be absolutely clear, the cheque is in the post. Can I carry on with this question of leadership? Because you should explain to people listening that at the moment the Director General is in charge of the entire organisation, and that's Traitors and Strictly and BBC Radio 3, classical music and everything. But he's also Editor-in-Chief. In other words, he's supposed to be the lead journalist at the BBC. And Tim Davie had many qualities, but he wasn't a journalist. How important would it be if you don't get what you want, if you don't get that kind of executive chairman, how important is it to have a journalist at the top?
I don't think it's absolutely essential, but what I saw in the BBC in the last few years I was there was an incredibly good combination of Mark Thompson, who was a journalist, also with experience of running organisations as Director General, and then Mark Byford as Deputy Director General. And there were times when Mark Byford used to really annoy everybody by getting in the way as people saw it and stopping the journalism as other critics would see it. Actually, what he was doing was sweeping for danger, looking for things that might go wrong. And I remember one occasion when the Ross Brand affair happened, when Jonathan Ross and Russell Brand did some terrible things with Andrew Sachs, the actor, in a prank phone call. And at that time, Mark Thompson was really steeled in what he had to do by Mark Byford alerting him to it, getting him on the case, saying it was serious. And you need that kind of system. It doesn't have to be two people or those particular two people. It does need something that means that the DG is not alone and the person responsible for every single thing that goes wrong.
Let's widen this out just one more time, because you've referred to one of the previous scandals, and let's be honest, there have been a fair number of them over the years. And each time people have said, this is the beginning of the end for the BBC, the licence fee will never survive this, and so on and so on. And indeed, the caravan rolls on despite that. Do you think the politics today, where we might very well have a reform government, and Nigel Farage has already said that he would not accept the licence fee, and there might be questions about the charter as well, make this different? In other words, the politics make the peril for the BBC greater than it's been in the past?
Yes, because you have this internal problem at the moment of management and leadership and who's going to do it. You've also got political challenges from Reform and from others. And then you've got the fact that the licence fee isn't probably sustainable in the long term. I've always thought the licence fee is the least worst way of funding the BBC. But patience for the licence fee and tolerance of it is clearly starting to evaporate. So all these things are happening at the same time. It's a perilous moment for the BBC.
It's a great job for somebody with a remarkable ambition and self-belief. Roger Mosey, thank you very much indeed for that.